Some buildings remember more than people do. They remember footsteps, voices, names spoken once and then forgotten. They remember laughter in empty corridors, chalk dust in the morning light, and the quiet sobs of children who believed no one was listening. At least that is what I began to believe after I came to Thornfield Grammar School. Before that year, I considered myself a practical woman. My name is Emma Carter, and for most of my adult life, I believed the world was made of ordinary things. Lesson plans, attendance sheets, rainy Monday mornings, half-finished cups of tea cooling beside stacks of essays. There was comfort in that kind of life. I had never been the sort of person who believed in ghosts. I had never seen one, never wanted to. And if someone had told me that an old classroom in the north of England could hold a secret for more than 30 years, I would have smiled politely and changed the subject. Then I met Daniel Harper. Or rather, I noticed the desk where he was supposed to sit. Thornfield Grammar stood on the edge of a small town surrounded by wet fields and black stone walls. The school was over a century old, built in the Gothic style that made every window look solemn and every hallway feel like the inside of a church. Its towers were narrow. Its staircases curled like old bones. Rain seemed permanently attached to the roof. Even in late summer, the building felt cold. Not uncomfortable exactly, just aware, as though the walls were listening. I arrived in September, newly hired as a literature teacher. I was 34, recently divorced, and eager to begin again somewhere quiet. A fresh start, people called it. I didn't tell them that fresh starts often feel less like freedom, and more like walking into a room where nobody knows what you have survived. The headmaster, Mr. Ellison, greeted me on my first morning with a firm handshake and a tired smile. He was a tall man with thinning silver hair and the careful voice of someone who had spent years calming anxious parents. "Room 214 will be yours," he said, leading me through the old building. We passed trophy cabinets, faded photographs, oil paintings of former headmasters whose eyes seemed to follow us through the corridors. "Year 10 literature," he continued. Bright group. A little restless at times, but nothing unusual. Room 214 sat at the far end of the second floor. The moment he opened the door, I felt a strange pressure in my chest. The classroom was beautiful in a sad way. Tall windows overlooked the courtyard. Wooden desks were arranged in neat rows. Bookshelves lined one wall. An old blackboard still hung at the front despite the whiteboard installed beside it. Dust drifted through the pale morning light. It should have felt welcoming. Instead, it felt as though I had stepped into a memory. Mr. Ellison seemed not to notice. "Everything you need should be here," he said. "If anything is missing, ask Mrs. Vale in the office." Then he left me alone. I spent the next hour arranging books, writing my name on the board, and pretending I wasn't nervous. When the bell finally rang, students began filling the room. They came in laughing, whispering, dragging chairs, dropping bags. The usual chaos. It made me feel better. Real. Normal. I introduced myself, took attendance, and began the first lesson. That was when I noticed the empty desk. It sat at the very back of the classroom near the window. The chair was tucked in neatly. No bag. No books. No student. At first I thought nothing of it. Students were often absent. Then I checked the register. The name was there. Daniel Harper. I looked around the room. Daniel Harper. No one answered. A few students glanced at one another. One boy near the front shrugged. I marked him absent and continued. The same thing happened the next day. And the next. Daniel Harper appeared on the attendance list every morning. And every morning, the desk remained empty. By Friday, curiosity finally overcame me. After class, I asked a girl named Sophie to stay behind for a moment. She was thoughtful, observant, the kind of student teachers quickly learn to trust. "Sophie," I said, trying to sound casual, "do you know Daniel Harper?" She frowned. "Who, Daniel Harper?" "He's on the class register." Her frown deepened. "I don't think we have a Daniel in this class, miss." "You've never heard the name?" She shook her head. No. That answer unsettled me more than it should have. I checked the register again after she left. Daniel Harper remained there. Clear as anything. Not a printing error. Not a different class. Room 214. Year 10 Literature. Daniel Harper. The following Monday, he appeared. I was writing the day's topic on the board when the classroom fell strangely quiet. Not completely, but enough for me to notice. The kind of quiet that spreads when something enters a room unexpectedly. I turned around, and there he was. A boy sitting at the empty desk near the window. He looked about 14, thin, pale, brown hair neatly combed. His uniform was correct, but oddly old-fashioned. The blazer seemed slightly different from the others. Darker, the tie narrower. He sat very straight, both hands resting on the desk. No bag, no notebook, just Daniel. For a moment I simply stared. He looked back calmly, not embarrassed, not defiant, just present. "Daniel Harper?" I asked. He nodded once. His eyes were a soft blue-gray, unusually solemn for a child. "I'm glad you could join us," I said, recovering my teacher voice. A few students turned to look at him, but only briefly, almost carelessly, as if they hadn't just spent a week insisting he didn't exist. The lesson continued. Daniel didn't speak, he didn't raise his hand, but he listened with perfect attention. When I asked the class to write a short paragraph about memory and poetry, everyone groaned except him. He lowered his head and wrote carefully on a sheet of paper that I hadn't seen him take out. At the end of class, students rushed for the door. Daniel remained seated until the room had emptied. Then he stood. "Miss Carter." His voice startled me. It was soft, polite. "Yes, Daniel." He looked toward the blackboard. "Do you think people disappear when no one remembers them?" The question caught me completely off guard. I set down the papers I was holding. "That's a very sad question." He nodded. "I suppose it is." "Why do you ask?" Daniel looked at me then. There was something in his eyes I couldn't place. Not fear. Not exactly. More like longing. Just something I was thinking about. Before I could respond, he turned and walked out. I followed almost immediately. The corridor was empty. No footsteps. No voices. No sign of him. I told myself he must have gone quickly down the stairs. Children moved fast when they wanted to. Still, unease stayed with me for the rest of the day. Daniel returned the next morning, and the morning after that, always at the back desk, always quiet, always watching. He completed every assignment. His handwriting was beautiful. Too beautiful, almost. Careful, elegant letters that looked nothing like the hurried scrawl of the other students. Yet when I tried to collect his work, the page was never there. I would walk toward his desk, speak to another student, turn back, and Daniel would be gone. His chair tucked in, his desk empty. No paper, no trace. On Thursday, I asked the class directly, "Has anyone spoken to Daniel Harper?" Blank faces stared back at me. Sophie raised her hand cautiously. "Miss, who is Daniel Harper?" A cold silence filled my chest. I turned toward the back of the room. Daniel was sitting there, plainly visible, looking directly at me. "He's right there," I said. Every student turned. For one terrible second, nobody spoke. Then a boy named Adam laughed nervously. "Miss, there's no one there." The room began to murmur. Confused, amused, concerned. I looked at Daniel. He lowered his eyes. Sad, almost ashamed. I dismissed the subject quickly and forced myself through the rest of the lesson. By the final bell, my hands were shaking. The students left. Daniel remained. This time I didn't look away. I walked slowly toward his desk. "Daniel," I whispered. He looked up. "Why can't they see you?" His expression changed. Pain passed across his face. "I don't know." The simplicity of his answer made it worse. He seemed as frightened as I was, as lonely as anyone I had ever seen. Then the corridor bell rang. A sharp metallic sound. I blinked, just once, and he vanished. Not ran, not slipped away. Vanished. The chair remained tucked beneath the desk. The room stood silent. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. Then I noticed something scratched into the wooden surface of the desk. Fresh letters, pale against the dark wood. "Please don't forget me." My breath caught. I reached out and touched the words. The grooves felt real beneath my fingertips. I turned toward the door, meaning to call someone, anyone. But when I looked back at the desk, the words were gone. The surface was smooth, untouched, as if nothing had ever been written there, and yet I could still feel them beneath my fingers. "Please, don't forget me." For 3 nights, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words carved into the desk. "Please don't forget me." I could still feel the grooves beneath my fingertips. I could still see Daniel sitting quietly near the window. And most disturbing of all, I could still hear the confusion in my students' voices when they insisted no such boy existed. The rational part of my mind fought desperately for control. Stress, exhaustion, a new job, a difficult year. There had to be an explanation. There always was. Yet every morning when I entered room 214, Daniel was there, waiting. The autumn weather worsened as the weeks passed. Rain hammered against the old stone walls. Wind howled through narrow corridors. Sometimes the ancient building groaned so loudly it sounded as though someone were walking through empty halls after dark. Thornfield Grammar seemed different now. Not because the school had changed, because I had. Once you notice something impossible, the world never quite feels the same again. I began paying attention to details I had previously ignored. The cold corners of the building, the portraits whose eyes seemed strangely alive, the distant sounds echoing through empty stairwells. Most of all, I paid attention to Daniel. The boy remained exactly the same. Polite, quiet, attentive. Every lesson he sat at the back desk. Every lesson he completed. Every assignment. And every lesson ended the same way. The moment I looked away, even for a second, he vanished. One Tuesday afternoon, I finally decided to test reality itself. Before class began, I placed my phone on a shelf at the back of the room. The camera faced directly toward Daniel's desk. If I was imagining him, the video would prove it. If I wasn't sure what I hoped to find. The lesson passed normally. Daniel sat near the window. Students discussed poetry. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Nothing unusual happened. At least not until the bell rang. The students gathered their books and left. Daniel remained seated. As always, I forced myself not to blink, not to look away. "Daniel," I said. He looked up. "Yes, Miss Carter." His voice remained soft, gentle, far older somehow than a 14-year-old boy's voice should have sounded. I swallowed. "Can I ask you something?" A faint smile appeared. "You always do." The answer surprised me. For the first time, there was humor in his expression. A trace of the boy he might once have been. "What happened to you?" The smile vanished immediately. Pain crossed his face. Not anger. Not fear. Pain. Daniel lowered his eyes. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "I don't remember everything." The sadness in his voice was unbearable. "What do you remember?" His gaze drifted toward the rain-streaked window. The classroom. Silence. The fire. My heart stopped. What fire? Daniel's expression darkened. "I hear them sometimes." The room suddenly felt colder. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. "What do you hear?" His answer came almost immediately. Screaming. A chill raced through my body. The bell for the next lesson rang somewhere in the corridor. Instinctively, I glanced toward the door. Only for a second. When I looked back, the desk was empty. Daniel had disappeared again. That evening, I reviewed the recording on my phone. At first, everything appeared normal. Students entering, students talking, students taking notes. Then I reached the moment Daniel should have appeared. My hands began shaking. Because he was there, clearly visible. The camera saw him. Every second of the lesson, every movement, every glance. Daniel Harper existed on video. I watched the recording twice, then 3 times. Still, the same result. The footage showed a quiet boy sitting at the back desk. Nothing supernatural, nothing distorted, just Daniel. Relief flooded through me. At least I wasn't hallucinating. Then I made a terrible mistake. I showed the video to another teacher. Her name was Claire Hughes. A history teacher. Friendly, practical, someone I trusted. We sat together in the staff room during lunch. "Tell me if you see anything strange." Claire watched the recording. Her expression never changed. When it ended, she looked confused. "Emma," my stomach tightened. "What?" "There's nobody sitting there." The world tilted. "What do you mean?" Claire pointed directly at the screen. "The desk is empty." I stared at the video. Daniel sat clearly in the recording. Visible. Obvious. Impossible to miss. Yet Claire genuinely couldn't see him. Fear settled heavily inside me. A different kind of fear. The kind that comes when reality begins disagreeing with itself. That night I stayed late at school. Long after the final students left. Long after darkness settled outside. The old building seemed alive after sunset. Not hostile, just awake. The corridors stretched endlessly beneath dim lights. Shadows filled every corner. The rain had finally stopped. The silence felt almost sacred. I found myself standing outside the archive room near the administration office. The school kept decades of records there. Attendance lists, photographs, old yearbooks. Something deep inside me already knew what I was looking for. Daniel Harper. The name appeared immediately. Not in current records, in historical ones. 1987. My pulse quickened. I carried several dusty folders to a nearby table and began reading. The story unfolded slowly, painfully, like uncovering a grave. In March 1987, Thornfield Grammar suffered a devastating fire. Several classrooms were destroyed. Multiple students lost their lives. The incident remained one of the darkest moments in the school's history. Most of the files contained newspaper clippings and official reports. Then I found a class photograph. The image was faded with age. Students stood in neat rows. Teachers positioned behind them. I almost dropped the photograph. Daniel stood in the second row, exactly as he appeared today. The same face, the same eyes, the same quiet expression. No older, no younger. My hands trembled violently. I checked the caption beneath the photograph. Daniel Harper, age 14, deceased, 1987. For several moments, I simply stared. The room seemed to disappear around me. Everything I had feared suddenly became real. Daniel wasn't a student. Not anymore. Daniel was a ghost. Yet somehow that word felt wrong. Ghosts were supposed to be frightening. Monsters from stories. Daniel wasn't frightening. He was lonely. The realization broke my heart. A boy, trapped inside a classroom for nearly 40 years. A boy nobody remembered. A boy desperately asking not to be forgotten. The archive clock struck 9. The sound echoed through the empty building. I gathered the files, preparing to leave. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft. Familiar. Miss Carter. I froze. The voice came from the corridor. Slowly, I stepped outside. The hallway stretched empty in both directions. Old lights cast long shadows across the floor. At the far end stood Daniel. His uniform seemed darker than usual, almost burned around the edges. He looked frightened. For the first time, Daniel. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't look away. "Do people still remember this place?" he asked quietly. The question hurt more than it should have. I glanced around the ancient corridor. The old walls, the worn floors, the forgotten history hidden beneath decades of paint. "I remember," I said. Something changed in his eyes. Relief, gratitude, then fear returned. Stronger this time. Daniel looked toward the darkness behind him. As though hearing something I couldn't, his face turned pale. "They're coming back." The temperature dropped instantly. A freezing wind swept through the corridor. Every light flickered at once. My heart hammered. Daniel looked directly at me and whispered the words that would change everything. The fire wasn't an accident. The lights exploded into darkness. Every bulb died simultaneously. The corridor vanished. Only blackness remained. Then I heard it. Children screaming. Dozens of voices. Terrified. Desperate. Crying for help. The sounds echoed through Thornfield Grammar, as though the year 1987 had suddenly returned. And somewhere inside that nightmare of voices, I heard Daniel calling my name. The screams stopped as suddenly as they had begun. One moment, the corridor was filled with terrified voices. The next, there was only silence. Absolute silence. The darkness remained. I stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, unable to move. My heart pounded so violently, it hurt. Every instinct told me to run, to leave Thornfield Grammar and never come back. But another feeling held me there. Daniel. The fear in his eyes before the lights died. The sadness that seemed permanently woven into his existence. And the words he had spoken. The fire wasn't an accident. A faint emergency light flickered to life at the far end of the corridor. Its pale glow stretched across the floor. Just enough illumination to reveal that I was alone. Daniel was gone. Again. The following morning, I arrived at school before sunrise. Rain fell steadily from a gray sky. The building looked even older than usual. The stone walls seemed darker, heavier, as though they carried the weight of every secret hidden inside them. I went directly to the archive room. If Daniel was telling the truth, then the official reports from 1987 had been incomplete. Someone had hidden something, and I intended to find out what it was. For hours I searched. Dust-covered boxes, old newspaper clippings, staff records, maintenance reports. Most revealed nothing new. The fire had always been described the same way. An unfortunate electrical fault, a tragic accident, a terrible loss. But then I found a folder hidden behind a row of ledgers. No label, no official stamp, almost as though someone had intentionally buried it. Inside were handwritten statements, witness accounts, private correspondence, documents that had never appeared in the official investigation. My hands trembled as I read. The truth emerged piece by piece, and it was far worse than I imagined. The fire began in room 214, my classroom, the same room where Daniel still sat every day, the same room where the empty desk waited near the window. According to the reports, several students had remained behind after school for a literature club meeting. A small fire started near a storage cabinet. Nothing major at first, nothing impossible to escape. Yet panic spread quickly. Smoke filled the room. Children rushed toward the door and discovered it was locked. I reread the sentence 3 times. Locked. Someone had locked the door. The next page revealed more. A teacher had accidentally secured the room during maintenance work. The key mechanism malfunctioned. By the time anyone realized what had happened, it was too late. Several students escaped through windows. Others didn't. Among those who died was 14-year-old Daniel Harper. I leaned back slowly, nausea twisting inside me. The official reports never mentioned the locked door, never mentioned negligence, never mentioned responsibility. Instead, the school had blamed faulty wiring, an accident, a tragedy without blame. The folder slipped from my hands. 38 years, 38 years of silence, 38 years of lies. And somehow, Daniel had remained, waiting, not for revenge, for the truth. That evening I stayed late again. The corridors emptied, the lights dimmed, and eventually only room 214 remained illuminated. I entered quietly. The classroom felt different, not frightening, expectant, as though something important was about to happen. The final rays of sunlight filtered through the windows. Dust floated in the golden light, and Daniel sat at the back desk, waiting. "I know," I said softly. He looked up. For the first time since I met him, there was hope in his eyes. "You found it." I nodded. The door was locked. The room became very still. Daniel lowered his gaze. I tried to open it. His voice shook slightly. The others were crying. I felt tears forming immediately. Not because of fear, because suddenly he wasn't a ghost. He was simply a child. A frightened child, trapped in a burning classroom. I couldn't help them. The words broke something inside me. "You were 14, Daniel." His eyes glistened, but they were scared. I walked toward him slowly. "You were scared too." The silence that followed felt enormous. Years of loneliness seemed to fill the room. Then Daniel whispered, "They forgot us." I looked around the classroom, at the walls, the desks, the windows, at all the years that had passed, and realized he was right. The school remembered the fire, but not the children. Not truly. Not individually. Not as people. Just names buried inside old files. Daniel stood slowly. For the first time he looked less like a ghost and more like the boy he should have been. "You can tell them." The request was simple, yet its meaning was immense. I understood immediately. The truth needed to be seen. The story needed to be told. The forgotten children needed to be remembered. The following weeks changed Thornfield Grammar forever. The hidden documents became public. The school board launched an investigation. Old archives were reopened. Newspapers covered the story. Former students returned. Families came forward. The truth buried for decades finally emerged into the light. Not everyone welcomed it. Some feared the damage to the school's reputation. Others argued the past should remain untouched. But the families disagreed. And so did I. Because forgetting is often the cruelest form of loss. In the spring, Thornfield Grammar unveiled a memorial in the central courtyard. A simple stone monument engraved with every student's name. including Daniel Harper. The ceremony took place beneath a clear blue sky. Parents, teachers, students, hundreds attended. Some cried, some remained silent. Many simply stood and read the names. For the first time in decades, the children were no longer forgotten. As the ceremony ended, I glanced toward the second-floor window of room 214, and there he was, Daniel, standing quietly behind the glass, watching. A gentle smile touched his face, the kind I had never seen before. A smile free from sadness, free from loneliness, free from waiting. That afternoon, after the crowd departed, I returned to the classroom one final time. The room felt peaceful, warm. The sunlight poured through the windows. The empty desk remained near the back wall. I walked toward it slowly, and found Daniel sitting there, exactly as he had on the first day, only different, brighter somehow, more alive. We looked at one another for a long moment. Neither of us spoke. Words seemed unnecessary. Finally, Daniel smiled, a real smile. The smile of a 14-year-old boy who no longer carried the weight of 38 forgotten years. "Thank you, Miss Carter." My throat tightened. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes," he said softly. "I do." The room seemed filled with sunlight, golden, gentle, peaceful. Daniel stood. For the first time, he walked away from the desk. Not toward the corridor, not toward the door, toward the window. I watched as he stepped into the light. The afternoon sun wrapped around him, and slowly, very slowly, he began to fade. Not frighteningly, not painfully, like mist disappearing beneath morning sunlight. Before he vanished completely, he turned back one last time. His eyes shone with gratitude and peace. Then he spoke the words he had waited nearly 4 decades to say, "Thank you for remembering." And he was gone. The classroom remained silent. The sunlight continued streaming through the glass. Outside, students laughed in the courtyard below. Life moved forward, as it always does. Years have passed since then. I still teach at Thornfield Grammar. Room 214 remains mine. Every September, I place a single book on the desk near the window. No one sits there anymore. No mysterious student appears. No voices echo through the hallways at night. The room is simply a classroom again. Yet sometimes when the afternoon sun strikes the desk at exactly the right angle, I find myself smiling, because I remember, and somewhere beyond memory, beyond grief, beyond time itself, I like to believe Daniel finally left the classroom, not because he was forgotten, but because at last he wasn't.